Armenia media. As we prepare to celebrate Christmas, more than 120,000 indigenous Armenians in Artsakh continue to remain under a blockade for the 12th consecutive day. The closure of the Lachin corridor by Azerbaijan, the only road connecting Artsakh to Armenia, has created a humanitarian and political crisis. To discuss the situation on the ground, today we are joined from Stepanakert by Gev Iskajyan from the Armenian National Committee of Artsakh. Gev, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
So this is the second time in the month of December that Azerbaijan has blocked the Lachin corridor. And this time it's been under the pretext of environmental concerns, even though increasingly it is obvious that it is actually a political act. Can you shed some light on what sparked this latest episode?
Yeah, I think it's really good that you prefaced it with the fact that this is the second time, because it's good to look at this from the context of like ongoing aggression. This isn't a one-off isolated event. This is part of a larger campaign that Azerbaijan is enacting to, to put it shortly and swiftly, to ethnically cleanse this population. Now, they have various methods and ways of doing that. As many of you are aware, earlier this year, they had cut off the gas when it was at its coldest temperature in Artsakh. They've done that again during the blockade here. And why that's important to note is that to say that, these are environmentalists that are enacting this or putting on a protest would be a false pretense, because we know that these things are corroborated and correlated with government action as well. So maybe the quote unquote activists can block the road, but they don't have access to the gas pipelines. The government does. And the fact that these things coincide with each other shows that this is part of Azerbaijan's ethnic cleansing campaign, and they want to exert as much pressure as they can onto the populace. Now, we're in the 12th day here of this blockade, obviously. And every day I can tell you that it becomes tougher, because we're talking about resource management. We're talking about finite resources that dwindle day by day: medicine, food, supplies, anything that a population needs to survive. Fortunately, we've got a very strong populace that is very cognizant of what Azerbaijan is trying to do, and essentially to make them leave their homeland, to make it as difficult as possible. And they're willing to endure all this. However, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't and we can't make sure that the international world, all the global partners that be, are cognizant of this, are aware of what's going on, and in turn, exert pressure onto Azerbaijan by more than just statements and condemnations to see what's going on in this region.
Yeah, we will come back to that point a bit later on. But first, I want to expand a little bit on this, topic of the humanitarian impact of this closure. Now, this road is really Artsakh's lifeline. It's the only road that connects Artsakh to the outside world via Armenia. Based on your interactions on the ground, following you on social media, you've been visiting schools and hospitals. And as you said, they also had cut off the gas supply, which meant schools had to stop operating. Can you talk a little bit more about the humanitarian situation and its implications?
Yeah. Absolutely. So this affects every layer of the population. There's no segment unaffected. I think that's a good baseline to create. So as you mentioned, the schools, we had 20,000 kids last week that were out of schools because we couldn't guarantee sufficient heating because of the gas that was cut off. Now you've got an elderly and a sick population that's dependent on the medication that comes into the country. As those resources dwindle, this has a very adverse effect on them. When we talk about the hospitals and the lack of care, it becomes more and more difficult, all these things compounded to meet the needs of people that need, let's say, very intensive care surgeries. A lot of that stuff happens in Yerevan. We transport them. They've been stuck here, and we've got almost a dozen patients, one of which unfortunately died because of his lack of access to that type of care. And furthermore, on the hospitals, I would say that, look, I was talking to folks at the Children's Hospital. We do have regularly here, we don't necessarily have the most sufficient, or adequate needs. Adequate amount of doctors here. So the Children's Hospital has like 4 or 5 of them, 2 of which happened to be in Yerevan at the time because they were transporting, young children there. And they got locked out. So now it's on the shoulders of like another, 2, 3 to handle the needs of the entire children's hospital here in Stepanakert, which makes it very, very difficult. The heating has been an issue. Today, like if we're talking about walking into the stores, you can see that fresh produce is short in stock here. So we're rationing what we have left. Nothing's coming out. And even the most basic of things that we don't even consider all the time. Like today I was walking by the banks and there was one bank that had an ATM still operating, unfortunately. And you're talking about one ATM for like 100,000 people. There's a massive line there. So cash shortages also become a problem because we rely on that to come in from the outside. So just about every segment and every layer of society here is affected. I would say, lastly, transportation too, which is a big issue. So a lot of the cars that run on gasoline here, no gas is coming. I don't mean heating gas. I mean actual like benzene and gasoline here. That's not coming into the country. So a lot of the people whose cars operate on that haven't been driving, and that halts our economic progress. That halts people's ability to work, to travel, to meet their various needs.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the case of, 2 doctors who were locked out because they were in Yerevan when the blockade started. And I believe I read that there were also reports of more than 1,000 individuals from Artsakh, including some 250 or more children who, have been separated from their families. They're stranded in Yerevan, unable to come back. Has there been a resolution to that, or is it literally no one in, no one out?
No one in and no one out. And some of these cases are, genuinely heartbreaking. We've got a couple of kids whose parents, like, for example, for work, they go to Goris, they end up coming back later on in the day. They were locked out. So we've got a few kids here that are literally separated from their parents, like 11 and 13-year-olds. Now, there is a very strong sense of community here in Artsakh. The rest of the folks in that specific village look after those kids. They take care of them and stuff. But it's truly heartbreaking to see the amount of separation between families where people can't see their kids, or kids can't see their parents. And it's really a difficult situation. And every day that goes by, it becomes more difficult as well.
Yeah, it just sounds horrific. I mean, most of us in the Western world can't imagine living under those circumstances. How are the people in Artsakh coping? What is the mood like in Artsakh?
So, what's good, as I mentioned before, is Artsakhis are no stranger to adversity or hardship. They've endured much, and they will endure this as well. And everybody I talk to, I try to get an on-the-ground perspective of what the difficulties are. But following every difficulty that they state, they follow it up with, we're here, we're going to stay here, we have to remain strong. And what's also important is that we're not going to be extorted. We're not going to give in to concessions, because Azerbaijan is denying us of our basic humanity, of our basic human rights, of our basic resources and necessities that we need to survive. So while it is very, very tough, the populace is cognizant of what's going on. They're very smart. They understand this larger game at play, the game of ethnic cleansing, to put pressure on them. And they're unwilling to bend to it. Yeah.
So since the 2020 Artsakh war, Azerbaijan at various points in time has, exerted different levels and different types of pressure on the government. especially of Armenia, to try and reap concessions, whether that's in the form of, land giveaway or, maps for landmines and things like that. You mentioned ethnic cleansing, but also from the viewpoint of, people in Artsakh and the leadership in Artsakh, is this also seen as some sort of pressure to try and reap further concessions? And what might those concessions be? I mean, what is the end game here?
So when folks ask me what's going on here, I like to tell them that Artsakhis here today are fighting not just for Artsakh, but for all of Armenia and the entirety of the Armenian nation. So Azerbaijan has a lot of demands or in the process of a lot of negotiations with the Armenian government. Things that we hear of are, the corridor through Sunik that they want. Things that we hear of are them wanting to bring their own peacekeepers into the region. So it affects not just Artsakh, but it also affects Armenia. And every day that the population of Artsakh withstands this, they fight against this, they endure this, they're making it tougher for Azerbaijan to exert that type of pressure. Now, what we need is for the international community to see this, to see that they're holding human lives at hostage for their negotiation process. And what's doubly important is that unfortunately, we've got major world powers when talking about our region, when talking about what's going on between Armenia, Artsakh, and Azerbaijan. They use these narratives of we need to build peace and we need to do this, but this isn't a peaceful process. This isn't a negotiable process. This is a process where through every sort of human right violations possible, Azerbaijan is trying to exert pressure and get what they want in this negotiation process, and that's absolutely unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable for Artsakhis, but this should also be absolutely unacceptable to any human being on earth.
Yeah, of course. Now, on 21 December, during a session of the UN Security Council, the representative of the Russian Federation said that the reopening of the Lachin corridor, will happen in the near future. Adding that the Russian government, through its ministries of defense and foreign affairs, as well as the command of the Russian peacekeeping forces, has been negotiating with the sides for a solution. From the situation on the ground, do you really think that the reopening might be imminent? Is there an end in sight?
Look, unfortunately, I can't speculate too deeply on, what state actors are thinking, what they're doing in the negotiating process. I can tell you that hinging our hopes on, statements and stuff might be futile, because last Saturday we heard word that, this will last a day or two. Obviously, that's not the case. So whatever it is, we as the diasporan community, we as the people of Artsakh, the people of Armenia, need to go full force in terms of making our voice heard throughout the world, making our demands clear, because if we are going to wait for any state actor to come and resolve the situation, we're in a futile position.
Yeah. On that point, your background is from ANC of America, and also obviously ANC is a political advocacy organization, and they're actively trying to raise awareness of this situation internationally. Can you just share with us, some of the steps and initiatives that are being taken, maybe particularly in the US, with the powers that be, to try and find a resolution to this situation?
Yeah. So on behalf of the ANC Artsakh office, I can say that we work with just about every single ANC region on earth. So it wouldn't just be, America centric, but all of our global partners, even the amazing folks at ANC Australia, which last week held a call with their Friends of Australia group. It included parliamentarians, state parliamentarians, leaders in your communities. A couple of days ago, we held a call with a few congressmen, congressional staff, and leaders in the United States. 3 days before that, we held a briefing with every single ANC region around the world, and we've got over 30 chapters from places like France, Lebanon, and the aforementioned, Australia, Canada, the United States, and everywhere else globally to strategize to see what we have ahead of us, to map out what our game plan is collectively, how we're going to exert certain pressure on these governments through the agency that our ANC advocates have in the nations that they live in. I like to see the ANC as the diplomatic core of the Armenian nation. Today, unfortunately, we want more effort, more pressure exerted on by the Armenian government. And there's lots of places that we don't see that. However, it's not the place to be disheartened. It's where we gear up and take more action. And we use the tools in our hands to go and advocate for the people of Artsakh and for the people of, and the entirety of the Armenian nation. As I mentioned before, a lot of things that happen here in Artsakh ripple through so many layers of the Armenian world. And I'm very proud of the action that the ANCs around the world have taken momentarily. It hasn't been a slow process. I can tell you, even 24 hours after this action, we were all coordinating, all working together. And our ANC Artsakh office is the newest office in the ANC world, but we're really proud and happy that this has been created in the last year, because we saw these challenges coming up. In the United States, when we were talking about how do we want to better advocate for Artsakh after the war, we had this acute understanding that the next 5 years were going to be very difficult for the people of Artsakh, because, as I mentioned, Azerbaijan was going to exert every type of pressure they can to ethnically cleanse this population. So it was imperative for us to have an office to be on the ground, so that when these things happen, we can break the news daily. When journalists can't get in, we can be on the ground. When we need to coordinate action and give daily updates to our ANC regions and chapters, we have the ability to do that. When we can testify in halls of Congress, the parliament, and everywhere else, we have folks on the ground that have the capacity to do that. So I'm happy to say that we're meeting all those needs, and we're doing it with the collective strength of the ANC around the world.
That's great to hear. Obviously, we're all hoping that this blockade ends sooner rather than later. But assuming it doesn't, and it lasts much longer than anyone would want it to, how is the government in Artsakh preparing for such a scenario?
So, look, even if this blockade ends, I can tell you that about 2-3 weeks ago, when the first time they closed this road happened, everybody in the know, and we made a very concerted effort to do this, said this is not the first time and this is not the last time. They are going to do this again. And if not through this method, they'll find another method to exert pressure. And surely enough, 2-3 weeks later, we're in the situation that we're in today. So I know that even if they were to, open up the blockade tomorrow, that next week, the week after, the month after, the year after, they would find pressure points and try to exert it onto this populace. So what we have to do, and I think, the government is also working towards that, is making sure that we have these self-sufficient needs to meet, the needs of this populace here. And it's not just the government, but we have amazing organizations throughout the world, namely organizations like the ARS that are helping us build energy independence. And independence is a word that I want to stress a lot, because let's say a lot of our gas comes through occupied areas that Azerbaijan controls. So the more that we can build our own independence here, the less reliant we are on the things that they can shut off, block out. And every time that we do that, it gives us the ability to endure longer, to last longer, to be able to brave any type of pressure that they're putting upon the populace. And I would also tell everyone that's listening or wondering, how can I help in these efforts? There's one, get in touch with your local ANCs, your regional ANCs, the ANCs in your country to, help lobby and help put pressure onto the foreign diplomats and people that live in your country. Secondly, if you want to have a more tangible way that you can contribute, the ARS is building solar heating installations. So 1, we need energy all the time. 2, we need heat all the time, especially in rural areas. The more that we can build that, the less reliant we are on everybody else.
It's, Christmas Eve, evening of 24th of December, in Sydney. And, as people prepare to celebrate Christmas, there is a sense of sadness and maybe sometimes even, hopelessness looking at what's happening in Artsakh. I just want to ask you basically, what would be your message to people in the diaspora at this time?
Look, after the war, unfortunately, I've seen this misconception of like people thinking that, well, now Artsakh is in this difficult position, or some people thinking Artsakh is unreachable, or even worse, Artsakh is gone. I can tell you, being on the ground, that is absolutely not the case. Artsakh is still here. Artsakhis are still fighting for their right to exist, fighting for the existential gains of the Armenian nation as a whole. There's still kids here that go to school. There's still mothers and fathers that go to work every day. There's still a society that braves every type of pressure and human rights abuse on behalf of the Azerbaijani government. We have something beautiful and something incredible to fight for here. We have the legacy of the Armenian nation, the pride of the Armenian nation here in Artsakh. And that is something that we can only maintain, we can only guarantee Artsakh forever with the collective help of every single Armenian around the world. So in whichever way, by whatever means that anybody in the diaspora can contribute, whether it's through your skill set, whether it's, donating to nation building projects here in Artsakh, whether it's through advocacy, take it up. There's lots of things to be sad about, but there's lots of things to be proud about. Against all odds, we're still here. Against all odds, we're still fighting. And against all odds, I believe that Artsakh will one day be a free and independent state. And it'll be a history and a lesson that we can teach our kids, and one with pride.
Gev Iskajyan joining us live from Stepanakert. Thank you very much again for making the time and for shedding the spotlight on the situation in Artsakh today. Thank you.
Thank you, Houry, and thank you guys for always being in tune with Artsakh and sharing this message and sharing this news.